Hello everybody, it's me, Kylie. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to do a review of Black Apple by Joan Crate. I hope you can see that. Okay. So Black Apple is about a little girl named Sinopaki who gets forcibly taken from her home in the bush with her parents and her little brother. So someone comes and actually takes her in a car away and tells her parents they don't have a choice, she has to go to school. And it's about her growing up in the residential school system in Canada in the late 50s. And after a incident in her first year, the matron of the school is she's kind of like the principal. She's in charge of everything. Her name's Mother Grace. She I don't know if you can hear that. It's an electric saw. Great. Anyways, Mother Grace selects Rosemary for special private tutoring, and Mother Grace uses her power and influence in an attempt to control the direction of Rosemary's life, or Sinopaki. For anyone who doesn't know, residential schools in Canada were residential schools in Canada were schools that were funded by the government but run by the Catholic Church. It went from about 1876 to the last school closed in 1996. And this fact freaked me out. There were still residential schools when I was born. That is messed up. Gosh. Okay, so for anyone who hasn't heard of residential schools, the purpose of residential schools, I got most of this information from Wikipedia, but this is the general gist of it. Remove children from the influence of their own culture and assimilate them into the dominant Canadian culture. 150,000 Indigenous children attended these schools nationally while they were open. And these schools were intentionally located substantial distances from the Indigenous communities to minimize the children's contact with their family. So it's still pretty horrifying just to think about. This is definitely a very heavy topic. These schools sucked, and they had super bad conditions. They were funded by the government, but they weren't funded well. Or at least during this book. This is coming to the end of residential schools, and the school that Sinopaki went to didn't have a lot of money. The food that they were giving the children was really just kind of holy shit. And even though I was talking to my mom about this, the books takes place kind of in the mid-late 50s it would start, and then it spans a course of about 15 years. But at one point, when the girls are coming back from their summer vacation, one of them is talking about Elvis Presley. And so I looked him up on the internet, and his first hit was in 56. So that's the earliest it could have been. And in the book in Black Apple, it talks about the school not having enough money to be burning coal overnight in the winter. So the girls are just freezing their asses off basically in a prairie winter, which here, I don't know about back then, but it gets to -40 for sure. And I'm just so confused, because when I was reading through it, it really seemed like something that would even take place more in the early 1900s rather than the 1950s, 1960s, because I feel I think they did have running water But I felt like shouldn't they have like a better like heating system in the building and like better like electricity and phones? Like there's situations where like someone needed to talk to someone and they're in a different town, but they like usually just send letters to each other, and I was just so confused about like, wasn't there phones? I feel like there was phones already in the 60s, but like, yeah. So yeah, so basically residential schools remove children from their families, forbid them to speak their native languages, and lots of times expose them to physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. Most students who attended and then graduated the schools, once they were done schools, they didn't fit in with their Indigenous communities anymore, and they also didn't fit in properly with regular Canadian communities either. So the schools didn't even work after all that crap. The legacy of the system is linked to a prevalence of substance abuse, PTSD, alcoholism, and suicide, which are all things that are still largely prevalent in Indigenous communities within Canada today. So basically, it's our fault of why the Indigenous community is the way it is today. Like, 100%. 100%. It's just... Okay. So, in 2008, the government created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which basically did research over a period of 5 years, talking to residential school survivors and taking their statements basically of what things were like when they were at school and what they experienced. This commission published their findings in 2015, and the conclusion was that the Canadian residential school system was responsible for a cultural genocide. So let's just let that sink in. Like that's rank. So that's what this book is about. The Sinopaki is growing up in a residential school for girls that's run by mostly elderly nuns. There's a couple priests at the school, but I don't think they do much of the teaching. They just do like the actual like church services and confession and things like that, and the physical work that needs to be done. But most of the nuns that are actually like teaching and running the school are fairly old. There's only 2 that I think were like younger. So anyways, so the writing style, Joan Crate is the author, and I think she did a pretty good job. It wasn't like anything like riveting, but it wasn't bad. It was good, consistent writing. There's 2 points of view. You have Rose, or Sinopaki, who is the girl that's growing up and experiencing all this, and then the other point of view is Mother Grace, who is like the matron, the principal, what we would call her now, I suppose, of the school. And so you see things from both perspectives. The school, okay, so this book made me reflect on my beliefs and made me question them. This statement in particular, all children should be educated. Before I read this book, like I definitely just like blanket like believe that statement. I think that everyone should be educated, and everyone's entitled to education, and decent education at that. But then after reading this book, I think about that statement, all children should be educated. And I think, should they? How? Where? By who? Who decides what they learn? And how does religion fit into that? Because residential schools took that statement and ran with it. And they basically decided that not only should all children be educated, but they should be educated in a Catholic religion. And they actually went and physically took children from their homes and decided, like, no, you need to be educated in our system because that's what we say. And so I do think that all people should be educated, but I don't see why each culture or I don't see why each culture can't create their own education system themselves. Like, I don't know that it was our responsibility or our right to go into Indigenous communities and force them into our education system. Obviously, everything they did about it was wrong. I think that if Indigenous communities want to educate their children in their own way, then maybe they should be allowed to do that. And then once the kids reach a certain age, if they want to go to normal school, they can go to normal school. Not normal school. If they want to go to our schools, they can go to our schools. But the biggest thing, like, who decides what we learn? That bothered me, and this book made me think about that a lot. Who decides what they learn? Because I often think that in our schools, we should definitely learn more home ec things than we do. Home ec was something that was definitely taught in my parents' generation and in her parents' generation. But I can tell you that I did not learn cooking and sewing and like things like that in elementary school. I would have had opportunity to take cooking classes in high school. I just chose not to. But I think that like gardening should be taught. I think that cooking should be a mandatory subject. Like, what do I know when I'm 14? Like, but when I grow up and move out of my parents' house, I should probably know how to cook a few things, right? I feel like people should know how to grow their own food and cook for sure. I feel like people should know how to mend their clothing. I feel like people should know how to do basic repairs around the house. A lot of things. Yeah, so this book made me really think about lots of those different things and yeah, just question what I believed basically and change how I think about certain things. So overall, I gave this book 4 stars. It has a really important, relevant, and kind of heavy like topics to it. It's definitely an emotional novel. You will cry. If you're a person who cries at things that happen in books, like when people die or, you know, like difficult situations that happen to the main character, you're probably going to be crying like 4 or 5 different times at least. I wasn't like ugly crying or anything, but it was definitely like super, super sad, the different things that happened to her. So this book ends when she's about 20 years old, and I really did like the ending. I really did. I wasn't sure it was going to go in that direction, but it did, and it surprised me what happened at the end, and I really liked how it ended. If there's a sequel, because I am so interested to learn what happens to her, you know, when she's not at the school anymore and stuff like that. If there's a sequel, I will definitely be reading it. So I don't know, I think that's what I thought of this book, and it was more a commentary on the residential schools than it was on the actual book, but it was a decent book. Like I said, good, consistent writing. It was a good story. It was an eye-opener, and I think it was an important story for, you know, Canadian history, and just to remember that bad things happened here too. It's, you know, sometimes it's hard to think of like your own country doing things like that, but it's important to remember the bad things that we've done and learn from them so that they don't happen again. Right? So, okay, so all in all, Black Apple by Joan Crate, an excellent read, 4 stars. I think you should read it. So, that's all I have for you today. Bye.